woman says no to a man at a party. Minutes later, she's dead. The man caught on camera with the murder weapon, he walks free. 6 months later, police arrest her own cousin for her murder. Nothing about this case makes sense. It's 3 a.m. on Labor Day weekend in Amarillo, Texas. A house party is winding down when tensions explode into violence. 4 gunshots ring out in rapid succession. When the chaos clears, a 25-year-old woman is lying on the asphalt with a bullet in her back, fighting for her life. Within hours, police have surveillance footage showing exactly who had the gun. They have witness statements. They have ballistics evidence. They make an arrest. The case seems solved. Then everything falls apart. The suspect, a 22-year-old white man with a criminal history, has his murder charges dropped just days after being arrested. Insufficient evidence, authorities claim, despite what appeared to be overwhelming proof of his guilt. The victim's family is left stunned, watching the person they believe killed their daughter walk free. But the story doesn't end there. It gets stranger. 6 months later, police make a new arrest. This time they charge the victim's own cousin, a young black man who was at the party that night. Someone the family trusted, someone who had never been mentioned as a suspect during the initial investigation. The same family that had been demanding justice suddenly finds themselves asking a different question. How did we get here? Tonight, we're taking you inside a case that exposes everything broken about how justice works in America. This isn't just about one tragic night in Texas. This is about what happens when evidence doesn't matter, when arrests don't stick, and when families are left to wonder if the color of someone's skin determines whether they face consequences for taking a life.
Okay. Period.
The woman who died was working double shifts at a meatpacking plant, saving money to become a dental hygienist. She had moved back home to spend time with her aging grandmother. She was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered, who made everyone around her feel special. She had dreams, plans, a future she was building one paycheck at a time. All of that ended because she refused to be isolated with a stranger at a party. Because she said no when a man told her she should stay while everyone else left. Because her cousin stepped in to protect her when she felt unsafe. The man who blocked her path that night, he's not the one who got charged with her murder. The man caught on video with the gun, he's walking free. The cousin who tried to help her get to safety, he's sitting in jail, facing a life sentence. We're going to walk you through every twist in this case, every decision that led to this moment, every piece of evidence that should have mattered but somehow didn't. We're going to show you how a night that started with birthday celebrations and family fun turned into a nightmare that's still unfolding. But more than that, we're going to tell you about the woman at the center of it all, who she was, what she meant to the people who loved her, and why her story matters far beyond the streets of Amarillo, Texas. This case will make you angry. It should make you angry, because when you see how this investigation unfolded, when you learn about the evidence that was collected and then seemingly ignored, when you understand the timeline of arrests and releases, you'll start to wonder the same thing her family is wondering. Is this what justice looks like in America? We're going to examine every angle of this story. The party that turned deadly. The investigation that seemed to have all the answers until it didn't. The family that went from demanding accountability to questioning everything they thought they knew. The community that rallied for justice, only to watch it slip away. And we're going to ask the hard questions. What really happened that night? Why were charges dropped against the first suspect? What new evidence led police to arrest someone completely different 6 months later? And most importantly, is the right person finally being held accountable? Or is this just another chapter in a story that's gone completely wrong? Before we start piecing this together, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments, because this story affects communities everywhere. And as we walk through this case together, let us know what you think. Does something feel off to you? Are we missing something? Because the more we dig into this story, the more questions we have. This is the case that has a Texas family asking whether justice is possible when the system seems designed to protect some people while failing others. This is the story of a woman who deserved so much better and a community that refuses to let her be forgotten. Let's start from the beginning. Her name was Felita Jovan Bailey, but everyone who mattered called her FeFe. And once you met FeFe, you understood why people were drawn to her like gravity. She wasn't just someone who walked into a room, she transformed it. FeFe had this gift for making people feel like they were the most important person in the world when she talked to them. She'd remember details about your life that you'd forgotten you'd shared. She'd check in on you when you were going through tough times. She'd celebrate your wins like they were her own victories. But don't mistake her warmth for weakness. FeFe Bailey was tough in the way that people who've had to work for everything they have learn to be tough. Every morning before dawn, she'd roll out of bed, throw on her work uniform, and head to the Tyson Foods plant. 8 hours on a packing line, standing in the cold, her hands moving in the same motions thousands of times a day. The smell of meat and industrial oil would cling to her clothes, under her fingernails, in her hair. Most people would complain. FeFe would come home and tell her grandmother about the coworker who made her laugh during break, or how she'd help train someone new who was struggling with the pace. She'd talk about her supervisors like they were people she genuinely cared about, not just bosses she had to tolerate. Because that was FeFe, she found humanity everywhere, even in the most grinding circumstances. Her grandmother, Felita Bailey Sr., would watch her granddaughter come home exhausted every day and never once heard her talk about quitting. Instead, FeFe would sit at the kitchen table with her school books, studying for her certification exams, planning out her future as a dental hygienist. She'd talk about how she wanted to work with kids, how she wanted to be the kind of healthcare worker who made people feel comfortable when they were scared. The two Felitas, grandmother and granddaughter, had turned their shared living space into something special. They'd cook together most evenings, FeFe learning recipes that had been passed down through generations. They'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing. FeFe would tell her grandmother about her dreams for the future, and her grandmother would share stories about raising a family, about perseverance, about what it meant to be a Bailey woman. These weren't just conversations between relatives. They were two women recognizing strength in each other, building each other up during a time when both of them needed that connection. FeFe had made the choice to move back to Amarillo specifically for these moments. She'd had a life in Dallas, friends and opportunities there, but she understood something that not everyone her age grasps: time with the people you love isn't unlimited. Her grandmother was getting older, and FeFe wanted to be present for this chapter of her life. That decision tells you everything about who she was. At 25, when most people are focused entirely on building their own futures, FeFe was mature enough to understand that family comes first, that some opportunities are more valuable than career advancement or social scenes. Her cousin Demagia Bibles saw this side of her constantly. He'd watch FeFe juggle work, school, and family responsibilities without ever acting like she was sacrificing anything. She'd make time for younger cousins who needed someone to listen to them. She'd show up for birthday parties and family gatherings even when she was exhausted from work. She'd call relatives just to check in, not because she needed anything, but because she knew they needed to hear from someone who cared. Demagia and FeFe had grown up more like siblings than cousins. They shared the same sense of humor. Both of them could crack jokes that would have the whole family laughing until their sides hurt. They had the same protective instincts when it came to people they loved. They both understood that in their family, you showed up for each other, period. But FeFe was also fiercely independent. She paid her own bills, saved her own money, made her own decisions about her future. The dental hygienist program wasn't just a career goal for her. It was a pathway to the kind of stability and respect she'd been working toward her entire adult life. She wanted to help people, but she also wanted to build something that was hers, something that would let her take care of her family the way they'd always taken care of each other. People who worked with her at Tyson would later say that FeFe was the person who kept morale up during the worst shifts. She'd sing along to whatever music was playing in the break room. She'd remember everyone's birthday. she'd share her lunch with co-workers who'd forgotten theirs. She approached even the most mind-numbing work with gratitude because she understood it was stepping stone towards something better. That gratitude, that optimism, that genuine care for other people, these weren't just personality traits. They were choices FeFe made every day about how she wanted to move through the world. On August 30th, 2024, all of that was taken away in a matter of minutes. Friday, August 30th, 2024. FeFe had clocked out of her shift at Tyson Foods with one thing on her mind. Tonight was going to be fun. Her cousin Demagie was turning 27, and after a long week of grinding at the plant, she was ready to celebrate with the people who mattered most. This wasn't going to be some wild night out. This was family time, the kind of low-key celebration that meant everything to both of them. Demagie had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks, and FeFe had been planning to make sure he felt special. They started the evening at Mulligan's Sports Bar in Amarillo around 10 p.m. Nothing fancy, just a local spot where they could grab drinks, laugh, and catch up properly. The energy between them was exactly what you'd expect from cousins who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They were joking around, reminiscing about old times, talking about Demagie's future plans now that he was another year older. The bar scene was exactly what they needed. Good music, decent drinks, and that relaxed atmosphere that comes when you're surrounded by people who know how to have a good time without drama. FeFe was in her element, dancing a little, making conversation with people they just met, being the social connector she'd always been. After a few hours at Mulligan's, they decided to check out some of the clubs on Polk Street downtown. Amarillo's nightlife scene isn't massive, but on a Friday night before a long weekend, the energy was electric. They bar hopped a little, soaking in the music and the crowd, just two family members enjoying each other's company and the freedom that comes with having a night off from responsibilities. As the clock approached 2 a.m., most places were getting ready for last call. The night could have ended there. They could have called it a successful celebration and headed home. FeFe would have gone back to her grandmother's house, probably stayed up a little longer, telling her about the evening, then gotten some sleep before another week of work and school. Instead, FeFe's phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything. Someone was throwing an after-party on South Avondale Street. The Marrero brothers were hosting something at their house, and word was spreading through text chains and social media. It wasn't an exclusive thing, just a casual gathering for people who weren't ready for the night to end. FeFe and Demagie looked at each other and made a split-second decision. Why not? They were having fun. The night was still young, and it might be a good way to meet some new people. Neither of them knew the Marrero brothers personally, but that didn't matter. In a city like Amarillo, house parties were often community events where friends of friends just showed up and everyone was welcome. They made their way to the 1300 block of South Avondale Street sometime after 2:30 a.m. What they found was bigger than they'd expected. About 40 people spilling out of a modest house onto the front yard and street. Cars were parked everywhere. Music was pumping from inside, and people were moving between the house and the outdoor areas with drinks in their hands. FeFe didn't recognize most of the faces, but that was fine. She was with Demagie, she felt safe, and the vibe seemed friendly enough. They made their way inside, grabbed drinks, and started mingling with the crowd. For about an hour, everything was exactly what you'd expect from a late-night house party. People were talking, laughing, dancing. Some were playing drinking games. Others were just hanging out in small groups, enjoying the kind of conversations that happen when everyone's in a good mood and nobody has anywhere else to be. FeFe was doing what she always did, making people feel comfortable, joining conversations, being the kind of person who made a party better just by being there. Demagie was keeping an eye on things the way he always did, but he was relaxed. This felt like a safe space filled with people who were just trying to have a good time. Then things started to shift. Around 3 a.m., the mood in the house began to change. The Marrero brothers were looking around at their packed house and realizing that way too many uninvited people had shown up. What had started as a manageable gathering had turned into something bigger and harder to control. People they didn't know were in their kitchen, their bedrooms, their personal spaces. They made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. They were going to start clearing people out. The party had been fun, but it was time to wind things down before it got out of hand. LaToy Johnson stepped up to help with the process. He was 24 years old, a former high school football player who still carried himself like someone used to being in charge. LaToy knew the Marrero brothers well, and he took it upon himself to start telling people the party was over. He moved through the house systematically, approaching groups of people and letting them know it was time to go. Most people were understanding. It was late, the party had been going for hours, and nobody wanted to overstay their welcome. But when LaToy got to FeFe, something different happened. Instead of simply telling her the party was over, he blocked her path. He looked directly at her and said she could stay while everyone else needed to leave. The implication was clear. He wanted her to remain in the house while her friends and family departed. FeFe's reaction was immediate and instinctive. She felt uncomfortable. She didn't know this man personally, had no reason to trust him, and certainly wasn't interested in being isolated with him while everyone she'd come with left the party. This wasn't a polite invitation. It felt predatory. She refused. Clearly and directly, she told LaToy she wasn't interested in staying. She was leaving with her cousin. End of discussion. DeMagia, who had been watching the interaction, immediately stepped in. He could see that FeFe was uncomfortable, and his protective instincts kicked in completely. He made it clear that they were both leaving, right now, together. They turned toward the door, trying to exit the situation as quickly and peacefully as possible. FeFe just wanted to get out of there. The fun night out had taken a turn she didn't like, and all she wanted was to go home safely. But at that exact moment, tensions that had been building elsewhere in the house reached a breaking point. An argument erupted between other partygoers, people who had been drinking for hours, people who didn't know each other well, people who were probably frustrated about being told to leave. What started as raised voices quickly escalated into pushing, then shoving, then throwing punches. The brawl exploded through the house like wildfire. People were screaming, bottles were being smashed against walls, furniture was being knocked over. What had been a crowded but manageable party suddenly became complete chaos. FeFe and DeMagia found themselves caught in the middle of violence they had nothing to do with. They were trying to make their way to the door, trying to get to their car across the street, trying to escape a situation that had become dangerous in a matter of seconds. The fight spilled out of the house onto the front yard and into the street. People were running in different directions, some trying to break up the violence, others just trying to get away from it. And somewhere in that chaos, someone pulled out a gun. At exactly 3 a.m., 4 gunshots rang out in rapid succession. People dropped to the ground, scattered behind cars, ran in every direction they could. In the immediate aftermath, nobody was sure where the shots had come from or who had been hit. When the screaming stopped and people started looking around, they found FeFe lying on the asphalt. A bullet had struck her in the back, traveled upward through her torso, and caused massive internal damage. She was conscious but struggling to breathe. Her lung had collapsed, and blood was pooling beneath her. DeMagia and other family members didn't wait for an ambulance. They scooped FeFe up, loaded her into a car, and raced toward Northwest Texas Hospital, running red lights and praying they could get her there in time. As they sped through the empty streets of Amarillo, FeFe was fighting for every breath. The car screeched into the ambulance bay at Northwest Texas Hospital just after 3:15 a.m. DeMagia and the other family members who had driven FeFe there were yelling for help before they'd even come to a complete stop. Hospital staff rushed out to meet them. When they opened the car door, they found FeFe barely conscious, her breathing shallow and labored. The bullet had done exactly what bullets do to human bodies. It had torn through tissue, shattered bone, and caused damage that was spreading with every passing second. The trauma team pulled FeFe from the vehicle and immediately saw the scope of what they were dealing with. The entry wound in her back told only part of the story. The bullet had traveled upward through her torso, puncturing her right lung and shattering her clavicle. Her lung had collapsed completely, which explained why she was gasping for air with every breath. They rushed her into the emergency room, and the fight to save her life began immediately. The medical team worked with the kind of precision that comes from years of training and too much experience with gunshot wounds. They inserted a chest tube to try to reinflate her collapsed lung. They started multiple IV lines to get blood and fluids into her system. They administered emergency medications designed to stabilize her blood pressure and keep her heart functioning. But the damage was extensive. The bullet had created a path of destruction through some of the most vital areas of her body. Her chest cavity was filling with blood faster than they could address it. Her breathing was becoming more labored, despite the chest tube. The trauma surgeon worked frantically, but the internal injuries were beyond what emergency medicine could repair. FeFe's body was shutting down from the trauma, and there was only so much the medical team could do to fight against the inevitable. At 3:53 a.m. on August 31st, 2024, just as the sun was beginning to rise over Amarillo, FeFe's heart stopped beating. The medical team performed CPR, trying everything they could to bring her back. They worked on her for several more minutes, pushing medications, providing electrical shocks to her heart, refusing to give up on a 25-year-old woman who had fought so hard to survive. But the damage was too severe. At 3:53 a.m., FeFe was pronounced dead. In the waiting area, her family had no idea what was happening behind the closed doors of the trauma bay. Demagia had driven himself to the hospital despite his own injuries from the brawl, a gash on his head that was bleeding heavily and a broken jaw that made it painful to speak. But when he'd arrived at the hospital, instead of being treated as an injured family member trying to get information about his cousin, he was immediately approached by police officers. They ushered him into a separate room, ostensibly to get his statement about what had happened at the party. But while Demagia sat there with blood running down his face, begging for updates about FeFe's condition, officers were asking him questions about the fight, about who was there, about what he'd seen. He kept asking, "Where's FeFe? How is she? Can I see her?" But instead of answers, he got more questions. Meanwhile, other family members were arriving at the hospital one by one as word spread that something terrible had happened. FeFe's mother, Odessa Bailey, got the call every parent dreads and rushed to the hospital, not knowing whether her daughter was alive or dead. FeFe's grandmother, Felita Sr., arrived in a state of panic. This was the granddaughter she'd been cooking with just hours earlier, the young woman who had moved back to Amarillo specifically to spend time with her. The woman she'd named her granddaughter after, watching her fight for her life in a place she never should have been. Other aunts, uncles, and cousins gathered in the waiting room, all of them desperate for information, all of them praying that FeFe would pull through this. And initially, they were given reason to hope. Hospital staff told the family that FeFe was in stable condition and waiting for the doctor. It wasn't detailed information, but it suggested that she was alive and that the medical team was working on her. The family clung to that update, reassuring each other that FeFe was strong, that she would fight through this, that everything was going to be okay. For hours they waited, they prayed together, comforted each other, and tried to stay positive. They talked about how tough FeFe was, how she'd always been a fighter, how she wouldn't let something like this defeat her. But behind the scenes, FeFe had already been gone for hours. Around 7 a.m., as early morning sunlight was streaming through the hospital windows, a police sergeant finally approached the Bailey family. He asked them to step into a private room, away from the other people in the waiting area. The family knew immediately that something was wrong. You don't get pulled into private rooms for good news. The sergeant delivered the news that shattered their world. FeFe was gone. She had died hours earlier, and for reasons that were never clearly explained, the family had been allowed to hope when there was no hope left. Odessa Bailey's reaction was immediate and raw. The grief of losing a child is something that can't be prepared for or processed rationally. She broke down completely, but her anguish quickly turned into something else, a fierce, burning anger at whoever had done this to her daughter. Through her tears, Odessa made a statement that captured the depth of her pain and her desire for justice. Tie a boulder around your neck and walk into the ocean. That's what justice looks like for me. She was speaking directly to whoever had killed Faye, expressing a mother's wish for the most complete form of accountability possible. Faith's grandmother, Felita Sr., said later that when she heard the news, she felt like she couldn't breathe. The granddaughter she had been so close to, the young woman who had given up her life in Dallas to spend time with family, was never coming home. Demigie, when he was finally told what had happened, punched a wall in helpless rage. His bandaged hands, his broken jaw, his head wound, none of his physical pain compared to the emotional devastation of losing the cousin who had been like a sister to him. The impact of FeFe's death spread through the family immediately. An entire extended family was suddenly dealing with a loss that felt impossible to comprehend. Hardened first responders who had seen too much tragedy said later that this case hit them differently. A young woman dead over something so senseless, and a family completely destroyed. The family's pain in this moment is unimaginable. If you've ever lost someone to violence, we see you. Let us know in the comments if you want us to cover your loved one's story. While Faith's family was learning the worst news of their lives inside Northwest Texas Hospital, Amarillo police officers were processing one of the most chaotic crime scenes they'd encountered in years. The 1300 block of South Avondale Street looked like a war zone. Broken glass from smashed bottles littered the front yard. Scattered party cups and personal belongings were strewn across the asphalt. Blood stains marked the spot where FeFe had fallen. 4 spent shell casings glinted in the early morning light, evidence of the gunshots that had ended her life. But this wasn't going to be one of those cases where police had to piece together what happened from minimal evidence. This was 2024, and nearly everyone at the party had been recording on their phones. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood immediately, looking for any surveillance cameras that might have captured the violence. They hit the jackpot almost immediately when they found that the Marrero house had a Ring doorbell camera that had been recording throughout the entire incident. The footage was game-changing. It showed the brawl spilling out of the house onto the street. It captured the moment when gunshots rang out. Most importantly, it showed a figure in dark clothing with a ski mask, and the outline of a handgun was clearly visible. But the Ring camera wasn't the only digital evidence police collected. Partygoers had been posting to Snapchat throughout the night, and some of those videos had captured crucial moments during the violence. One Snapchat video showed Demigie trying to shield FeFe as chaos erupted around them. Another showed the masked figure with the gun during the altercation. The person in the video was wearing distinctive clothing, a Chicago Bulls hoodie, a New York Yankees cap, and the ski mask that obscured his face. But his build, his height, and his movements were all clearly captured on multiple recordings. Police also began interviewing witnesses immediately. More than 50 people had been at the party, and while many had fled when the shooting started, enough remained to provide detailed statements about what they'd seen. Several witnesses identified the masked gunman as Dylan Zane Black, a 22-year-old white man who went by the nickname DZ around Amarillo's nightlife scene. Dylan wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. He had a criminal history that included a burglary charge and had previously been listed as a fugitive of the week by Crime Stoppers for violating probation. The witness statements painted a consistent picture. Dylan had been at the party with LaToya Johnson and other friends. When the brawl started, Dylan was seen on the periphery of the fight with his hand on the gun in his waistband. Multiple people heard him make threatening statements during the altercation. When the gunshots rang out, witnesses saw Dylan in the area where the shots had been fired. After FeFe was hit, Dylan fled the scene along with most other partygoers. But here's where the case took an interesting turn. Dylan didn't just disappear after the shooting. He showed up at Northwest Texas Hospital, the same place where FeFe's family was desperately waiting for news about her condition. In the hospital waiting area, Dylan stood out immediately. He was the only white person among LaToya's mostly black supporters and friends. FeFe's relatives noticed him because he seemed oddly familiar with LaToya's family, even referring to LaToya's mother as Mom, as if he were part of their inner circle. When police questioned Dylan at the hospital, he gave them a story that seemed plausible on the surface. He claimed he hadn't been at the party at all. According to Dylan, he had only come to the hospital after hearing that his friend Latoy had been shot. He presented himself as a concerned friend who was just trying to support someone he cared about. It was a smart move. By showing up at the hospital and expressing concern for Latoy, Dylan was creating an alibi and positioning himself as someone who couldn't possibly be responsible for the violence. But Dylan had made one critical miscalculation. He didn't know about the video evidence. When police reviewed the Ring doorbell footage and the Snapchat videos, Dylan's story fell apart completely. The recordings clearly showed him at the party, participating in the altercation and holding the gun that was used in the shooting. Acting on a tip from witnesses, police searched a house connected to one of Dylan's friends. What they found there was devastating evidence: clothing that matched exactly what the gunman had been wearing in the videos, now stained with blood. Hidden nearby was a 9mm handgun. Ballistics testing confirmed what police already suspected. The gun recovered from Dylan's friend's house was the weapon that had fired the 4 shots on Avondale Street. The shell casings found at the crime scene matched the unique markings left by this specific firearm. On Sunday, September 1st, 2024, just one day after FeFe's murder, police tracked Dylan down in the nearby community of Bushland and arrested him without incident. By September 3rd, the Amarillo Police Department was announcing publicly that they had arrested the accused shooter and charged 22-year-old Dylan Black with FeFe's murder. Dylan was being held on a $500,000 bond, and police spokesman credited the quick arrest to community cooperation and solid detective work. For FeFe's family, the arrest felt like the first step toward justice. They had video evidence, ballistics matches, witness statements, and physical evidence tying Dylan to the crime. The case seemed as solid as any murder prosecution could be. Dylan was formally charged with murder, and court documents laid out the evidence against him in detail. The criminal complaint described how Dylan had repeatedly lied to officers, changing his story multiple times when confronted with evidence that contradicted his claims. For 2 days, it looked like the system was working exactly as it should. A young woman had been killed. Police had quickly identified the suspect, gathered compelling evidence, and made an arrest. Justice seemed to be moving forward. Then everything changed. On September 5th, 2024, just 2 days after Dylan had been charged with murder, the Potter County District Attorney's Office made a stunning announcement. They were dropping the murder charge against Dylan Black, citing insufficient evidence. The news hit FeFe's family like a physical blow. They had been shown what appeared to be overwhelming evidence against Dylan. They had been told he was the shooter. They had watched him get arrested and charged. Now, less than a week after their daughter's death, they were being told that the person they believed had killed her was walking free. Odessa Bailey's reaction was immediate and furious. She accused the justice system of failing her daughter because of racial bias, stating publicly that she believed Dylan Black is getting away with killing my daughter because he's white and has connections. The dismissal of charges created an information vacuum that was quickly filled with speculation and misinformation. Social media posts, activist podcasts, and Facebook discussions spun theories ranging from police cover-ups to conspiracies involving local officials. The Amarillo Police Department later complained that this flood of false information had caused confusion and made their job more difficult. For 6 months, FeFe's case existed in legal limbo. Dylan Black was free, facing no charges related to her death. The family organized protests, held press conferences, and kept pressure on authorities to reopen the case. The #Justice for Felita movement grew on social media, with supporters demanding answers about why such apparently strong evidence had been deemed
Amarillo
insufficient.
Police Department is still investigating a homicide that occurred during a Labor Day weekend after party. The family of the victim, Felita Bailey, wants justice and answers. ABC 7's Reagan Lopez has that story.
My daughter she would be 26. She would have been 26 October 26th of this year.
According to police, officers responded after a fight started that spilled into the street where shots were fired. Felita Bailey and another victim were taken to the hospital where Felita died.
She spent her last moments fighting men.
The first and only known suspect, 22-year-old Dylan Black, was arrested and charged with murder, but was later released due to insufficient evidence. When we spoke with APD Homicide Unit Commander Lieutenant Clements on September 9th, he said they're still waiting on ballistics.
But we want to make sure that we know exactly what happened on that scene 100% before we charge anybody with any kind of a charge that we.
Clements said there are new leads, but the case is still an ongoing investigation, and not much can be shared. Nearly a month later, and no other arrests have been made.
I just refuse to let my daughter case go unsolved. That's just not gonna happen. I'll fight. I can't even grieve because I have to fight. This is my only child.
The family of Felita Bailey asked witnesses to come forward.
Then, in March 2025, came another bombshell. Police announced they had made a new arrest in FeFe's murder. But this time, the person in handcuffs wasn't Dylan Black. It was Marin Kanye Bailey, FeFe's own cousin. Marin was a 20-year-old black man from Dallas who had been at the party that night with FeFe and Demagie. He was family, someone FeFe trusted, someone who had never been mentioned as a suspect during the initial investigation. The arrest was coordinated with U.S. Marshals, who located Marin in North Texas and brought him back to Amarillo to face murder charges. When news of Marin's arrest broke, FeFe's family was both surprised and skeptical. How had the investigation shifted from a white suspect with apparent video evidence against him to a black family member who hadn't been on anyone's radar for months? The family's reaction was swift and angry. They accused police of scapegoating Marin to protect Dylan, questioning why a relative who none of the 15 people interviewed ever brought up as a suspect had suddenly become the target. As of now, Marin Bailey sits in jail awaiting trial for FeFe's murder, while Dylan Black has never been convicted of any crime related to her death. The questions that began with FeFe's shooting have only multiplied. What new evidence led to Marin's arrest? Why were the original charges against Dylan dropped? And most importantly, is the right person finally being held accountable? Or has this case taken another wrong turn? In the months following FeFe's death, her mother, Odessa Bailey, underwent a transformation that no parent should ever have to experience. Before September 2024, Odessa had been a private person who kept her family business within the family. She worked, took care of her responsibilities, and stayed out of the public eye. But watching the person she believed had killed her daughter walk free changed everything. Odessa became a fierce advocate, appearing on local news programs and speaking at community forums. She organized press conferences where she stood in front of cameras and demanded answers from officials who seemed content to let the case fade into obscurity. She traveled back to Dallas to speak at churches and community centers, telling FeFe's story to anyone who would listen. The family created custom t-shirts with FeFe's photograph and the words "Justice delayed is justice denied." They wore them to every public appearance, every court hearing, every city council meeting where they could get time to speak. The shirts became a symbol of their refusal to let FeFe be forgotten. Social media became a battlefield for the family's fight. The hashtag #JusticeForFelita gained momentum as people across Texas and beyond learned about the case. Supporters shared FeFe's story, posted updates about the legal proceedings, and kept pressure on Amarillo officials to provide answers. The movement grew beyond just seeking justice for FeFe. Other families who had lost loved ones to violence in Amarillo began connecting with the Baileys, sharing their own stories of cases that had gone unsolved or prosecutions that had failed. A pattern began to emerge of families, particularly black families, who felt the system had failed their loved ones. Community vigils became regular events. Every month, people would gather at different locations around Amarillo to remember FeFe and other victims of violence. They would light candles, share memories, and pray together. These weren't just morning gatherings. They were organizing meetings where people strategized about how to keep pressure on officials and how to support each other through the legal process. The family also channeled their grief into positive action that honored FeFe's memory. They established a scholarship fund in her name at Eastfield College, the community college she had attended in Dallas. The scholarship specifically supports young women pursuing healthcare careers, ensuring that FeFe's dream of helping others through medical work continues through someone else's education. In Amarillo, FeFe's grandmother partnered with Greater Love Temple Church to start an annual backpack drive. Every summer before school starts, they collect school supplies and distribute them to children whose families can't afford everything they need. It's become known as the Felita Bailey Memorial Backpack Drive, and it grows larger each year as more community members contribute. On what would have been FeFe's 26th birthday, October 26, 2024, her loved ones organized the first annual FeFe Day celebration in Dallas. Hundreds of people gathered at her favorite park, released butterflies, and shared stories about the positive impact she'd had on their lives. Everyone wore pink, FeFe's favorite color, and the focus was entirely on celebrating the joy she had brought to the world. But even as the family found ways to honor FeFe's memory, the legal battle continued to consume their energy and test their faith in the system. The arrest of Marin Bailey created new tensions within the extended family. Some relatives struggled to understand how someone they trusted could be accused of such a horrible crime. Others remained convinced that police were targeting Marin to avoid accountability for their failure to prosecute Dylan Black. Family gatherings became complicated as different relatives processed the accusations against Marin in different ways. Some continued to support him, believing he was being wrongfully accused. Others weren't sure what to think, but remained focused on getting justice for FeFe, regardless of who was ultimately held responsible. The case has also sparked broader conversations about how violence against Black women is investigated and prosecuted. Activists have pointed to FeFe's case as an example of how victims from marginalized communities often don't receive the same level of attention or resources as victims from more privileged backgrounds. Local domestic violence organizations have used FeFe's story in their educational programs, highlighting how quickly situations can escalate when women refuse unwanted advances. They've developed bystander intervention workshops that teach people how to safely step in when they see someone being harassed, the kind of intervention that might have changed the outcome that night on Avondale Street. The Amarillo Police Department, facing criticism for how the case was handled, has reportedly revised some of their protocols for communicating with victims' families during investigations. They're considering assigning dedicated family liaison officers for homicide cases, ensuring that no family goes through the confusion and misinformation that the Baileys experienced. As Marin's case moves toward trial, the family faces an uncertain future. If he's convicted, they'll have to reconcile the fact that FeFe was killed by someone she trusted. If he's acquitted, they'll be back where they started, with no one held accountable for her death and questions about whether the real killer is still walking free. But regardless of what happens in court, the Bailey family has already ensured that FeFe's death means something beyond the tragedy itself. Through their advocacy, their community organizing, and their determination to keep her memory alive, they've created change that extends far beyond their own pursuit of justice. Odessa Bailey often says that she doesn't want the world to only remember how FeFe died, but also how she lived, full of love, generosity, and hope for the future. Through scholarships, community programs, and the ongoing fight for accountability, that's exactly what they've accomplished. The legal system may have failed FeFe, but her family has made sure that her legacy will continue to impact lives for years to come. Felita Bailey deserved so much more than this. Her story reminds us why we can't stay silent when the system fails victims and their families. Share this video to keep her memory alive. Subscribe to stay updated on cases like this, and let us know what other stories we should tell. Justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied.